Welcome back to our study in the life of Christ, the chronological life of Christ, and we're looking at Luke 1, 5 to 14, John's birth predicted. Remember the outline, the major outline we're using is following F. Lagarde Smith with adjustments from Ruck Ashman. This is another one which is set out slightly more clearly in some elements. A chronological harmony of the Gospels, beginning with the public ministry. We'll look at John's birth predicted. We're looking at Luke 1, 5 all the way through to 25 basically. In a different modern version, it's easier to read, some people think. And you'll see also that not only is Luke verse 117 actually seen as a fulfillment of a prophecy, but it's also similar ideas found in Matthew 11 and Matthew 17 and Mark 9. Talking about the idea that John would be the new Elijah, the Elijah to come. So we have a historical background. We remember the big changes that took place in the 400 years of silence. Within those 400 years of silence, we had the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great over conquering the Persian Empire. Then we had the Maccabean rebellions, and then we have ultimately the death of Herod the Great in the time we're looking at now. In the days of Herod, which Herod? There are many Herods in the Bible. Luke says that this Herod was the king of Judea. We're talking here about Herod the First, commonly referred to as Herod the Great. The date of the birth of this Herod was probably 74 BC, and the period during which he reigned over the Jews is generally dated 37 to 4 BC. Herod the Great acquired the provinces he ruled over by paying large sums of money to the Romans. This is important to know when it comes to dating the birth of Jesus, because as we will see, this man is the one who tries to kill Jesus, which means that Jesus had to be born earlier than 4 BC. This can be somewhat confusing since most probably think that Jesus was born when the record of time went from BC to AD. But there was a mistake made by the man who came up with the AD calendar. We still don't know the exact day or the exact year for sure, but we do know that Jesus had to be born before 4 BC because Herod died in that year. So this is the same Herod that Matthew mentioned in Matthew 2:16. It's not to be confused with Herod the Tetrarch, who was his son in Matthew 14:1. Why Herods? Herod was the name used by several kings belonging to the Herodian dynasty of the Roman Judean province. Let's have a look at a number of Herods that are mentioned in the Bible. I know it'll get a little bit confusing, but here are a number of ones that are mentioned, and take your time to have a look at that in more detail later. So the background of Jesus, you see all these Herods. Gets a bit confusing in trying to identify exactly which one is speaking when. But this little article here will probably help you out a little bit. So Herod the Great, or Herod the First, was a Roman client king of Judea. It referred to as the Herodian kingdom. The history of their legacy has polarized opinion, as he is known for his colossal building projects throughout Judea, including his renovation of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, the expansion of the Temple Mount towards its north, and the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron. Herod also constructed the port at Caesarea Maritima and the fortress at Masada and the Herodium. Vital details of his life are recorded in the works of Josephus the historian Josephus. Herod the First also appeared in the Gospel of Matthew as a ruler of Judea who orders the massacre of the innocents at the time of the birth of Jesus. Despite his successes, including single-handedly forging a new aristocracy from practically nothing, Herod the First is criticised by various historians. His reign polarizes opinion amongst scholars and historians, some viewing his legacy as evidence of success, some as a reminder of his tyrannical rule. Upon Herod's death, the Romans divided his kingdom among 3 of his sons and his sister. Archelaus became ethnarch of Judea, Samaria and Idumea. Herod Antipas became tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, and Philip became tetrarch of territories north and east of Jordan. Salome the First was given a toparchy including the cities of Jabneh, Ashdod, and Phasaelis. So, Herod Archelaus, 23rd BC to 18, was ethnarch of Samaria, Judea, and Idumea from 4 BC to 6 AD. He was the son of Herod the Great and Malthese, the brother of Herod Antipas, and the half-brother of Herod Philip I. Archelaus is mentioned in Matthew 2:13 to 23. An angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and told him to get up and take Mary and Jesus, flee to Egypt to avoid the massacre of the innocents. When Herod the Great died, Joseph was told by an angel in a dream to return to the land of Israel, and this explains why Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Herod Antipas, short for Antipros, before BC 20 to after AD 39, was an ancient leader, a tetrarch, meaning ruler of a quarter of Galilee and Perea. Antipas is best known today for his role in the events that led to the execution of John the Baptist and Jesus of Nazareth, both from the accounts of these events in the New Testament and their portrayal in modern media such as film. Herod Agrippa, also called the Great, king of the Jews, was the grandson of Herod the Great and the son of Aristobulus IV and Bernice. His original name was Marcus Julius Agrippa, and he was the king named Herod in the Acts of the Apostles by the Scriptures. Herod Philip I was the son of Herod the Great, his third wife Mariam II. He was the first husband of Herodias after 6 AD, and the child was Salome. Later, Herodias became romantically involved with Herod Antipas, and that's where John the Baptist entered in. John the Baptist rebuked him about his immorality with Herodias, his brother's wife. Herod Philip II, Philip the Tetrarch, was born Herod the Great, and his fifth wife, Cleopatra of Jerusalem and half-brother of Herod Antipas and Herod Archelaus. You can see how confusing this whole deal gets as you try to sort out which Herod you're talking about. Herod of Chalcis, also known as Herod III, king of Chalcis. Herod Agrippa II, Tetrarch of Chalcis, who was described in Acts of the Apostles as King Agrippa, before whom Paul of Tarsus defended himself. Here's a picture of the different kings and their reigns and times. 37 BC, all Palestine was under Herod the Great. Then you had 4 BC, you change, and then 34 BC, and then 39 BC, and then different Roman governors, and then 37 under Herod Agrippa as king, and then other Roman governors, and then Herod Agrippa II as king, and then a part of the AD 61. So in the lifetime of the Apostle Paul, you see all these people as well. And then it's a different picture, but it probably helps. Different things help different people, different pieces of information, and study it at your leisure. God chose the days of Herod the Great to send the Redeemer of mankind into the world. Herod in many ways personifies the trouble in Israel at the time of Christ. For a long time, hundreds of years, the Jews had lived under the control of one nation or another, and they longed to be truly autonomous. You remember when they're discussing with Jesus, they say, "We have never been under anybody's control." It seemed like whatever empire had the upper hand in history would be the one they would be under. If it wasn't the Babylonians, then it was the Persians when the Persians took over from Babylon. If it wasn't the Persians, it was the Greeks when Alexander came rumbling through the ancient Near East. If it wasn't Alexander, it was the Romans after the death of Alexander and the disintegration of his empire. The Jews still understood they were a holy people, set apart for God. They always remembered that, if nothing else. They rankled under the rule of Rome, and especially rubbed them the wrong way that the so-called Herod the Great had power over them. Herod was made king of the Jews by Roman emperor. He was not a Jew, but an Idumean, an Edomite, a descendant of Esau. Ethnically, he was what we would think of today as an Arab. The Roman conquest of Palestine was repugnant to most Jews to begin with. But their bitterness was even more agitated when the Romans appointed an Arab to rule over them. Herod, an Edomian, a descendant of Esau, was a name given to Esau in Genesis 25:30. Remember that although they were brothers, there was a deep-rooted hatred among the people. We say that because Jacob and Esau were reconciled to each other, but the descendants were never reconciled, nor even today are they reconciled. Many of the problems in the Middle East right now stem from the implacable hatred that Arabs have for Jews, and some of the Arabs are Edomites of Esau's line. One or two passages that show their hatred, for example, Numbers 20:18-21, the Edomites refused to let Israel pass through their land. 1 Samuel 14:47, Saul and David defeat the Edomites. 2 Chronicles 20:22, the Edomites tried to invade Israel, but fail. Isaiah 35:5-8 and Jeremiah 49:17, where Nebuchadnezzar sieges Jerusalem, the Edomites join in the slaughter of the Israelite fugitives. In the intertestamental period, the Edomites flourished until the time of the Maccabees. Then they were defeated and compelled to accept the religion of Israel. Herod was one of these. His grandfather had been the Edomite ruler, and his father Antipater or Antipas. Herod was made procurator by Julius Caesar in AD 47. That meant he was put in charge of the whole land, answerable to Caesar. What he did was divide the land up among his 4 sons. Now Herod I, Herod the Great, was given Galilee to govern. Herod was an able administrator, promoter of extravagant public building projects which required exorbitant taxation, which made him really popular. Herod was hardly a model for a human being. He has been called a monster, one who was crafty and cruel, jealous and vain, and always quick to seek revenge when wronged. He was cruel, sadistic, suspicious. He had 10 wives and many children. He nearly succeeded in obliterating the Jewish royal family, the Hasmoneans, through assassinations and executions. Herod ordered the execution of his wife, who he loved most, Miriam, a Hasmonean princess. Then he had her 2 sons slain, along with 5 sons of his by various other wives. He had heard rumors they were trying to get his throne from him. The Roman Emperor Augustus Octavius said, "It's better to be Herod's pig than his son." He was joking that Herod would have more scruples against violating Jewish tradition than murdering his relatives. When Herod was about to die, he ordered that all the most important men of Israel be rounded up and placed in a local stadium where they could be slain, because when he died, to ensure there would be great mourning at his funeral. He was the Herod who ordered the slaughter of the babies in Bethlehem in Matthew 2. As a matter of fact, we have the testimony of the pagan historian Macrobius, about 400 AD, writing a history of the time. He tells us that Herod ordered the children under 2 years to be slain, and among them was one of Herod's own sons. Herod did not make many distinctions. Herod became so crazy that Augustine had to do something about him. He had to remove him. He had to demote him. So when Herod died, instead of the authority being given to one man to run the land was divided up. No longer would Jews have a king as Herod the Great had been king. Herod was the personification of the condition of the world when God began to make preparation for his Redeemer to be sent. The world was cruel, materialistic, hateful, exploitive, cynical, and filled with despair. The Jewish people suffered much at the hands of their rulers. When Herod and the Romans were not oppressing them, their own religious leaders were. The religious life of the Jews, the integral part of their social and political life, had lost its vitality and helpfulness. The Pharisees had made their traditions a burden almost impossible to bear. The Sadducees were using religion to amass personal fortunes. The prophets of the Old Testament have spoken concerning an age of glorious righteousness and abundant spirituality for the Jewish people. But the last prophet had spoken 400 years earlier, and Yahweh had not said anything to his people ever since then. We need to understand, however, that this was divine judgment on the nation of Israel. They had neglected their relationship with God, and that the situation was inappropriate to their spiritual state. In this case, the outward circumstances reflected accurately the inward condition: slavery. It's no wonder then there was a great fascination in the nation of Israel with the prophecies about the Messiah, the one who would come and re-establish the greatness of their kingdom and their people. They misunderstood the prophecies. They were looking for a man who would rise up and smite their enemies and make national physical Israel a free people once again. From time to time, a fairly great and famous man would rise up, and there would be some excitement about the possibility of his being the Messiah. Of course, things would die down when he turned out to be quite human, and the slavery of Israel droned on and on. After time, there was even a certain amount of cynicism about the whole deal. Herod tried bribing the Jews so they would like him, and he could view himself as a successful ruler. Julius Caesar had given Herod a fantastic and truly royal inaugural celebration back in 37 BC, when Herod took the throne. The bribes came in the form of a building program that was a very rival of Solomon's. He built monuments and buildings in the Holy Land, and even rebuilt a temple in a magnificent fashion, topping it with a golden dome. More was added every year, a higher roof here, an annex there, all very magnificent. When Herod died, his relatives took over the folly, and seemingly never-ending program continued until it was finally finished in AD 66, some 87 years after it was begun. It's one of the great ironies of history that it was burned down just 4 years later when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. So here we see the earlier temple, and then the Seleucid addition, and then more extensions, and then Herod's temple in its magnificence. The days of Herod were most unlikely days for God to begin preparations for a Redeemer. Modern man with his advertising techniques would not have planned it this way, but God's ways are higher than man's. It's all the more significant in such a condition and time God chose to act in history for the accomplishment of his eternal redemptive purpose. John the Immerser was to come from the family of a priest. John's father's name was Zechariah. This man's lineage was from the descendants of Abijah. Abijah was a descendant of Eliza, the son of Aaron. The division of Abijah was one of the 20 groups of priests that served in the temple for 1 week twice a year. Every direct descendant of Aaron was automatically a priest. That meant that for all ordinary purposes there were far too many priests. They were therefore divided into 24 sections. Only at Passover, at Pentecost and the Feast of Tabernacles did all the priests serve. For the rest of the year in a rota system, each course served 2 periods of 1 week each. The priests who loved their work looked forward to that week of service above all things. It was the highlight of their lives. There was so many as 20,000 priests altogether, and so not far short of 1,000 in each section. Within the section, all duties were allocated by lot. Every morning and evening, sacrifice was made for the whole nation. A burnt offering of a male lamb, 1 year old, without spot or blemish, was offered, together with a meat offering, flour and oil, and a drink offering of wine. Before the morning sacrifice and after the evening sacrifice, incense was burned on the altar of incense, so that, as it were, the sacrifices might go up to God wrapped in an envelope of sweet-smelling incense. It was quite possible that many a priest would never have the privilege of burning incense all of his life. But if a lot did fall on any priest, that day was the greatest day in all of his life, the day he longed for and dreamed of. On this day the lot fell on Zacharias, and he would be thrilled to the core of his being. Zacharias' course was Abijah, the 8th in the list. Thus he would serve 8 weeks into the Jewish year, which began in April, not counting the week of Passover, and would serve again 6 months later. We can calculate the general time of the Lord's birth by figuring 1. The week of Zechariah's service, the week of Pentecost on which he would also serve, giving Zacharias time to get home several days, the last of June approximately, adding 6 months until Mary's conception, the last of December, and adding the 9 months until Christ's birth, the last of September, likely. Or it could have been during the second round of services that Zacharias was serving during the year, making Christ's birth 6 months later, or March. The evidence favours the early date. So our best evidence shows Jesus most likely born around 6 BC, either in September or March, which rules out December 25th as even coming close to the day he was born. Verse 5 says, there was a day Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zechariah. His wife was a daughter of Aaron. Her name was Elizabeth. My daughter Luke is trying to say that Elizabeth was a descendant from Aaron. Exodus 6:23, the law of Moses didn't require the priests to take for themselves a wife from a priestly family. The only other law reference in this, Leviticus 21:14, a widow or a divorced woman or a woman who has been defiled or a prostitute, these he shall not marry, but he shall take as his wife a virgin of his own people. But of course it was always good to marry a daughter of Aaron. In the beginning of his letter, Luke mentions a godly woman. We will see Luke's emphasis on women throughout his book. Zacharias meant Yahweh remembers. Elizabeth means the oath of God. Zacharias lived in the hill country southwest of Jerusalem. These were a pretty unusual couple. There were very few people in the Bible described as righteous. Noah was described as righteous. Most of the people we can think of described as being used by God usually are fairly flawed characters in one way or another. Zacharias and Elizabeth were righteous. The Bible says it flat and straight. They were righteous. They didn't just talk a talk, they walked the walk. They did not only profess to be righteous, they walked in the commandments of the Lord. They obeyed and kept his commandments. Can people from the Old Testament obtain righteousness? We understand we have righteousness because Jesus died and made us righteous. What about people from the Old Testament? Zacharias and Elizabeth were righteous. Righteous in the sense that they loved and obeyed God. Righteous means upright, sincere. Righteousness can mean strictly observant of morality, always behaving according to a religious or moral code. Zachariah and Elizabeth had taken the law of the Lord seriously all of their lives. They loved it, they obeyed it, and undoubtedly they had been reared in godly homes. Blameless. This literally means unblamed ones. It's the same word the Apostle Paul used of himself in Philippians 3 verse 6. There's another word translated unblemished, that is amos, in Ephesians 5:27. Of course, these two were not sinless. Any man who says he was without sin, Romans says, contradicts the word of God. They were righteous in the same way as Simeon and Anna and others belonging to the godly remnant. We have here a couple who were trying their best to serve God. God had always had a remnant that guards and keeps his word. The problem this couple faced right away was they had no child. Behold, children are a heritage for the Lord. For the fruit of the womb a reward, like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not put to shame when he speak with his enemies in the gate. That was exactly the idea of every Israelite. His children would be able to help him in business and protection. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, the mother of Samson, and Anna, they were all barren. We can see the sad situation of all these women from the Old Testament when they found out that they could not have a child. Many important men were born of women who had a condition that made it impossible for them to have children. Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Samson, Samuel, and now John the Baptiser. This couple faced these challenges with fortitude. They were both well advanced in years. They were serving the Lord and also walking in his ways. They grew old, and Elizabeth was very happy, although barren. She was content knowing that they were walking in the ways of the Lord. The turn came for Zacharias to serve God according to his division. This would have been his 1 week of service twice yearly. He was of the division of Abijah. According to custom of the priesthood, they selected a division that had to serve during that month by casting lots. This was a tremendous honour. And for these part-time priests, the highest service was the burning of incense. The priests were so numerous they actually drew lots to decide what their individual jobs would be when they were serving in the temple. Zacharias evidently had been special or favoured, because we are told that according to the custom of the priesthood, he had been chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord. This casting lots to decide what job they had to do avoided any disputes, as some jobs are more highly prized than others. The privilege of offering incense in the holy place, standing before the beautiful purple, was regarded as a great honour among the priests in the days of Jesus. A priest like Zacharias could only do this one time during his entire life. Every morning and evening burnt offering sacrifices were made for the nation. Before the morning sacrifice and after the evening sacrifice, a priest would be in the holy place. He would burn the incense on the altar that stood before the veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. Burning the incense would be seen as enveloping the smoke of the sacrifice, making it a sweet savour to God. This ritual paralleled the reality of prayer. After the evening sacrifice and the burning of incense, the priest would come out to the holy place and come to the rail of the courts and bless the people. This was the first reference to prayer that Luke would make in his book. Prayer is one of the most emphasized topics in the book of Luke. The people of God ought to be a people of prayer. The priest would come out of the Holy of Holies and out of the temple. He blessed the people who were waiting for him outside. The blessing with which he would bless the people is found in Numbers 6:24-26. Try to visualize the scene. It's the time of the morning sacrifice. The sun is just beginning to rise in the east, casting golden rays from behind the Mount of Olives. In the early morning light, the priests of the division of Abijah have assembled within the temple area. The lots are drawn. The lot falls to Zacharias. The old priest had been coming to the temple once every 6 months for many, many years. This is the first time he has ever been granted this privilege. He will never be allowed to do this service again. This is the most important moment in his life. The temple was regarded as the house of God. Once a morning sacrifice had been offered and his blood dipped in the horns of the great altar outside the temple, Zacharias climbs the steps leading up to the temple porch and passes through the great gold-leaved doors into the holy place. With Zacharias are 2 other priests who have been chosen to assist him in this service. The first priest removes the old coals that have been left from the previous evening service. He then retires from the temple. The second priest now advances and spreads the live coals across the altar. Then he also retires. Now Zacharias stands alone in the temple. 1,000 priests stand outside, and thousands of worshippers have gathered beyond in the court of Israel. But in here, it is quiet. To his left is a golden lampstand bathing the interior of the temple in the soft glow of its burning lamps. To his right is the table of showbread. Before him hangs a great woven veil 4 inches thick, which serves as a doorway to the Holy of Holies. In front of the veil stands the altar of incense. It's made of wood and completely overlaid with pure gold. Its hot coals glow dimly in the faint light of the temple. Zacharias steps up to the altar and begins to spread the incense over the altar. Suddenly, he is interrupted. Notice that this is the first time in almost 400 years that God is made ready to deal with his people and was ready to send a prophet, Malachi being the last one. Who is this angel of the Lord that appeared to Zacharias? We find that this is the archangel Gabriel. Like Luke, cautious, discriminating, and diligent scientist historian, was convinced of the reality of angels. There's no valid reason for us to dispute Luke's research. In Luke 1:19 we're told something very interesting about this angel. Then the angel said, I am Gabriel. I stand in the very presence of God. It was he who sent me to bring you this good news. That is a very significant thing. To stand in the presence of God. God used angels many times in ages past to assist him in his redemptive work. Sometimes they even appeared as men. God is able to make his angels appear as wind and fire, and sends them forth as ministering spirits to serve for the sake of those who are to obtain salvation. Angels do not necessarily have to take human form to do God's service. Some entertaining strangers have entertained angels unawares, the Hebrew writer says. Only members of court of very high rank ever stand in the presence of their sovereign. To say that Gabriel stands in the presence of God is an indication that he was an angel of very high rank indeed. It's almost old-fashioned to believe in angels, yet Luke has a lot to say about them. 10 times in his Gospel and in the book of Acts, Luke speaks about the ministry angels. Angelos means messenger, but in this instance it's quite clearly a supernatural messenger. In Scripture there are only 2 angels named, Gabriel and Michael. The word angel is a transliteration of the Greek word angelos, which literally means messenger. You cannot help but appreciate the great details that Luke records, which shows he did indeed have a perfect understanding of the things he wrote. The angel appeared to Zacharias on the right side of the incense, which is the space between the altar and the showbread temple. Even though he was righteous, this fear was a human and normal reaction when the angel appeared to him. 1 verse 12 says, when Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. This reaction was the same reaction that Mary had with the angel. This angel has not come to hurt Zacharias, but to bless him. The angel tells Zacharias that his prayer has been heard. Among the Jews, there was a belief that the appearance of an angel was a portent of immediate death. An example is found in Judges 39. An angel appeared to Manoah, the father, and his wife. Manoah is the father of Samson. He thinks the appearance of the angel means they're going to die. Both are convinced they've seen God. And Manoah exclaims, we are doomed to die. His wife, however, has a better understanding of God's communication. She comforts him, saying, if the Lord had meant to kill us, he wouldn't have accepted the burnt offering and the grain offering, nor shown us all these things. The angel was giving news of the birth of Samson. There's another reason too. When you bear in mind that for 400 years there has been no revelation from God. For 400 years there has been silence between the testaments from Malachi to Matthew. People had waited for the coming of the Messiah. Verse 13 says, the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your prayer is heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son. You should call his name John. Zacharias is alone in the temple. An angel appears because his prayers have been answered. What does it mean by supplication is heard? What is he praying for? Was he taking the opportunity for praying for a son? It's very important among the Jews that a man should have a son to carry on the family name. That was a terrible thing to die childless, and more particularly a terrible thing to die without a son, a male child. That's the reason that the birth of a son was always celebrated more than the birth of a daughter. When a son was born, the celebrations were twice as long as for a daughter. The Jews usually traced their lineage through the son, so much so that when a man died without a son, the law had a provision. The law said his brother, if he was unmarried, should marry the widow, and that the first son would be born should be named after the dead husband, that his name may not be blotted out. The law said in Deuteronomy 25:6, so in this way the name of the dead man was continued. The line was continued. Every righteous person receives their answer from God, whether it is yes or no. God hears our prayers when we are walking according to his will. There are many people who would love to hear that. We can be confident that we will listen to us, whenever we ask for anything in accordance with or in agreement with His will. Was Zacharias praying for a son? We do not know how old they were, but they were old. They had been praying for a son for many years. Elizabeth says was very well advanced in years. He is now presiding in the temple. Perhaps his prayer is heard during the sacrifice. A son. Perhaps he asked for that too. Zacharias has now received the answer, and the promise is, "You shall have a son." This is the way God works. He answers prayer according to His timing. He waits until it's humanly impossible, and then He steps in. He didn't give Abraham a son until he was too old to have one. He didn't give prosperity to Jacob until he made a fugitive in a strange land. He didn't make Joseph ruler over Egypt until he had placed him in slavery and into prison. He didn't allow Moses to lead Israel until he had allowed the Israelites to reject him. He didn't give Gideon the victory until he had first taken Gideon's army and reduced it to a small force of 300 men. He didn't make David king until he had first made David an outlaw without a country. If he didn't make disciples leaders of his assembly until he first scattered them and brought them to the point where they denied his name. Why does God work this way? Why does He wait until the situation is humanly impossible? Perhaps it's only then that we will give Him the glory, because only God could have achieved it. This is a promise from God. God is faithful in what we ask from Him. He will not abandon us while we are prepared to walk with Him. This promise of the Son is a very surprising statement, but considering the cases of Sarah, Rachel and Anna, it would not be very difficult for Zacharias to believe. The angel tells Zacharias that this child will come when they are well advanced in years. Very little is actually said about the birth of the child. There's more information concerning his name, the type of character he would have, his ministry, his distinctive office of forerunner of the Messiah. There could be at least two reasons. First, the obvious one, the fact that John himself was a gift of God's grace to Elizabeth and Zachariah and the revisions. This couple had been childless. Then there's a deeper meaning, and that is the ministry that John was later to undertake. It was also a ministry connected with grace. Remember that the Messiah who came into the world was to bring grace and truth, and John was the forerunner, the announcer of the greatest gift of God's grace. He would be born to the power of God, and his name would be John. The name means God is gracious, or gift of Yahweh. The angel's mention of the name should have helped Zacharias believe. And you will have joy and gladness. Many will rejoice at his birth, verse 14 says. This is exactly what happens in 158. They all rejoiced when John was born. The birth of this man could bring joy to everybody. Zacharias and Elizabeth would be full of joy. Because of the mercies the Lord gave them, God had given them the forerunner of the Messiah.